Let's start. My name is Matija Dujmović, and I'm a Java developer at King ICT. I'm also a teaching assistant at the Polytechnic of Zagreb. And today I will be talking about JShell. So before I start, I'd like to ask the audience, how many of you have tried out JShell? Okay, so only 2 people. Then I think this will be an interesting presentation for the rest of you. So let's start. What is JShell? JShell is the official Java REPL implementation. It's been released in the Java 9 JDK as a tool. So it's not a part of the Java library, but a tool included with the Java library. It's also included as an API in the JDK if you wish to implement it in your own applications, which JetBrains has done with IntelliJ and NetBeans. So, for those of you who don't know what a REPL is a read, evaluate, print loop. It reads user input, it evaluates the input, and it prints out the result of the input. And this happens until the user exits the REPL. So, just to ask the audience, how many of you have used a REPL? So, a little bit more, less than I expected. For a little bit of REPL history, the first implementation of REPL was made in Lisp in 1958. And just a little while later, 60 years, Java has its own REPL. But the big languages such as C# and even Kotlin only last year when it was introduced got a REPL. So Java isn't really that late, relatively speaking. So how did you try out code without JShell? How do you try it out now? You need to open your IDE. You need to create a new project. You need to create a new class, and then you need to create a new method, and finally you can enter some code which you can execute and examine the output. So this is a very long process for something as simple as what's 1 plus 1, or possibly addition of an integer and double variable. So I'm not a Java developer, I want to find out what that does. This is a lot of overhead. So what JShell does is it gets rid of it. You just need to open JShell and you can execute code. That's the magic of a REPL. You get instant gratification. You know the moment you pressed enter what it has done. Additionally, JShell has removed overhead. So expressions and statements in JShell don't need to be in methods. Methods don't need to be in classes. And there is no need for a main method, obviously. One of the big extras of JShell is great auto-completion. So I dare to say the biggest feature of JShell is documentation exploration and API exploration. I'll show you this in a live demo. So, I've downloaded the Java 9 JDK and just added the bin folder of the JDK into my environment variable. And I'm going to start JShell. Sorry. So I've downloaded the Java 9 JDK. Sorry. Technical difficulties? Okay. It just randomly changed the display settings. Okay, so I've downloaded the Java 9 JDK, and I've added the bin folder to the path variable in my environment variables on Windows, of course. And I'm going to start JShell with a flag -v. So what this does, it starts JShell in a verbose mode, something you'll appreciate as many of you haven't seen how JShell works. This will add additional outputs to JShell's inputs. And just to mention, there are other modes such as silent mode and standard mode for when you really don't need JShell to tell you anything because you know everything. And let's start with something simple, like the example I said earlier. I'm going to add 2 numbers. And what this does, as you can see, JShell has created something called a scratch variable. So scratch variables start with the $sign and just increment. Every time, a scratch variable is created every time you don't assign an expression result to a value. So for instance, if I assign this to 1 + 1 to an a variable, there's no need for scratch variables. But the scratch variable is a regular variable and it can be used like any other one. Here's another one. Okay? And just a second. So JShell, when JShell talks about inputs, it talks about snippets. So what is a snippet in a more general term? A snippet is a statement, an expression, a method, a class. It can be a multi-line statement. So basically any fully featured part of code in Java. And one other thing, I didn't have to put any termination. So this this isn't needed, the sign. I can't remember it. Semicolon, okay. Sorry. So I've used the scratch variable, and now I'm going to use another feature of JShell that's not used in Java, in regular Java. So I'm going to define a method, and I'm going to call another method from it without referencing it, without declaring it first. And this is a valid code for JShell, but it gives me a fair warning. It created the method foo, but it won't let me call it until I declare the bar method. And we can test it out. I just get the same warning again. It's warning me. It hasn't called the method. So let's define this bar method. It will return a simple string. And I get info. This is from verbose mode, all these outputs. So my bar method has been created, and automatically JShell looked for methods that were waiting for my bar method, and I get an update. So foo method is now fully callable, and it works. Another thing is I can easily overwrite a method. And it notifies me again. I've now overwritten my old version of the bar method. And if I call foo, it really outputs the new string. This can lead to some error behavior that can't occur in Java. So what JShell does is, let's try to create a void bar method, which will be invalid in the foo method. The method has overwritten my old bar method, but I've gotten a nice warning telling me you can't call foo until you properly declare bar. So it's very descriptive, and once you catch up, you'll intuitively know what's happening. So that's forward references in JShell. Until now, I've been talking about integers and strings and simple methods. We can, of course, declarate classes It works regularly. I won't go too much into it, nothing special there. But I talked about the auto-completion as a great feature. So I'm going to show you what JShell does. I want to create a list of integer variables and print it out. But I'm new to Java. This is my first time in the code. Somebody told me something about an array or something like that class to create a list. So I've written 3 letters, and I'm pressing tab. And JShell has completed my input until the point of ambiguity, where it's offering me what else I can use to complete my input. So I want the arrays method, but I've never used the arrays. I want the arrays class, but I've never used the arrays class. And what I want to do now is look what methods are available in the arrays class. So I just write a dot, press tab again, and I get a list of all the methods that the arrays class offers me. In this case, I want the asList method. I just write 2 letters, press tab, and now, when I've got the parentheses open, if I press tab, I will get the method signature. So already this is very useful. But maybe I don't know what the asList method does. If I press tab again, I will get a nicely outputted Java doc, which tells me exactly everything and only specifically for that method which I want to use. So let's input some integers. And we got another scratch variable. This time it's a list integer. So let's go with a for each. Okay, what does it do? Aha, iterable. Okay, I'll get a null pointer. Great. So I want to print it out. And that's that. Now, this may seem trivial to a lot of you that are in Java for a long time, but when you're learning, this means a lot. This is very good for the learning process. And so until now, I've only been entering valid Java code into JShell, but now I'm going to show a JShell command. So JShell commands start with a slash. And in this case, I want to show you how I use the arrays class without importing it. Because why is that possible? Because JShell imports a few of the most used packages by default. And we can check by calling the JShell command imports. So IO is here, math is here, and util is here. We have everything that we need. But for example, I want to start again and open a snippet of code I made earlier. So I'm using the slash open command, and I'm going to open my file called file-io.jshell. Now, just to be clear, the file extension name is JShell just because it's easier for me to save it like that. When using the open command, JShell can open any textual file, and it parses through it, searching for valid Java code. So you can call it any way you want. JShell is my choice. Now that I've opened my snippet, I'm gonna list out what I wrote in the snippet. And it's a basic read file method. It takes a file path. It uses the java.neo to read it and output it with a for each, like the last example. Now, I'm gonna call it and pass it a valid file path. And it outputted something from the file. But what happens if I pass it some garbage? It throws an exception. But it gives me a very easy way to look where the exception occurred. So in line number 3, if I list the lines I've entered, line number 3 is here, and in a second I can see how the exception occurred. So very descriptive. Until now, I've been talking about, I'm going to use the reset command to reset my JShell session. This is the same as exiting it and entering again. So if I list, you won't see any commands previously. And finally, I'd like to show you how I can import something. So if I list the imports again, you'll see I'm missing Java date, and I really want to know what the date is. So I'm gonna import it and use auto-completion. So it's offering me the available packages, and again, okay, I want to use the date, time, sorry, and asterisk. So now I've imported the Java time package, and I'll do something simple like look at what the time is now. Nothing extra. But let's do something extra, like calculating how many days are left until the next Java conference in Croatia. So I'm using that now. I'm going to use the local date time of, and here we go. In this example, I want to create a local datetime object. And as you can see, there are a lot of methods here. Earlier, I showed you a method that had only one signature, but in this case, there are a lot of them. This is immensely helpful when you're quick in the coding and you don't have time to look around for what method signature is appropriate for you. But just for clarity's sake, if I continue pressing space, I will get the method signature in the order that I will get the Java doc outputted for every signature that was shown before. So in this case, I really just need to use the one where I input the year, the month, the day, and let's put it at midnight. Okay. And now I want to output the duration to days. And here autocomplete, okay, 2, and okay, here's days. Here we go. 78 days till Java Crow. Let's save this as a snippet. Put it into a Java Crow JShell file. Okay. And this created a file in our file system regularly. And the file contains all the commands we entered. So we had to import Java time, we looked at the date today, and we wanted to look at the date in a few days. So I can use this file, and I can output it just to show you the JShell will accept this. I'm calling reset and opening my JShell file, JShell snippet, calling list, and it's been formatted as a method. So now I can call Java time until Java Crow, and I'll get the resulting variable. Now, you don't need to edit all of your stuff in JShell or go opening an external file editor just to save it and then open it again in JShell. JShell has something called the edit command, and by default, it opens a pretty ugly Java FX editor, which clearly isn't optimized for full HD screens in 2018. We can fix this very quickly, just for a short example, I'll set another editor. In this case, it will be Notepad. And now if I call edit again, I'll get it in Notepad. Obviously not formatted correctly, but you get the picture. You can open it in Emacs or Notepad++ or Sublime. It really doesn't matter. So that's about it from the editor and from the live demo. Now, maybe you're asking yourselves, how does all of this work? It looks really strange. I don't have to have classes. I don't have to have methods. What's happening there? Well, the truth is, from the user's point of view, everything, all the variables, methods, and classes declared by the user appear as global. But internally, and I won't go too deep into this, all the variables, methods, and classes are actually declared as static members of a user-invisible synthetic class. That's how it's called in the official documentation. So that, all of that goes into the synthetic class, and all of my statements and expressions go into synthetic methods that are static members of the synthetic class. So it's behind the scenes, it's all valid Java code. And you may be asking yourselves, okay, I know the Java library, but can I use this on some other libraries, my user libraries or external libraries? Well, of course you can. You can just define it through the class path. Or there's a very useful GitHub project called try-artifact. It's actually a fork of the JShell implementation in the final release of Java 9. And it lets you try out different frameworks by using Maven as a dependency management tool. So very easily, you can enter through the try-artifact JShell, you can enter Spring 5. And in the next moment, it, of course, downloads the dependencies and puts you inside of the context, and you can try new features, reactive programming. All of it is very quick. But sadly, there are some problems with JShell and external libraries. These are two of the most critical ones. So Javadoc for external libraries is unreadable. It throws an error. I don't know how they didn't fix that. It's fixed in a pre-release version. So if it's something that really interests you, just use the pre-release version of Java 9. Not a very good solution, but there's that. And the import autocompletion is broken. So for instance, if I imported the Google Guava library, it wouldn't autocomplete the com.google. It would act as if it doesn't know what I'm trying to do. And I'd like to finish this presentation by looking at the two perspective uses of JShell. The first one being a learner's perspective. So we're all professionals here. Some of us are going to be professionals very soon because we're students. And we can't forget that learning the language is very important, because if you learn something wrong, it will be very hard to unlearn it. So from my own experience, because I do a lot of tutoring in private and work at the Polytechnic in Zagreb, students that use the REPL learn faster. Now, I'm not talking only about Java. The C has a great REPL for years. It's great. Once you go REPL, you can't go back. And of course, learning new APIs. I didn't touch on the many new features that Java 9 offers aside from the JShell, but it's incredibly easy to try out something as immutable lists that Radovan was talking about earlier. And of course, it's great for quickly experimenting with algorithms. No need to wait for the IDE to launch, just quickly write a for loop. The other perspective is, of course, the professional's perspective. So JShell is great for rapid prototyping. And I'm not just saying this, I've been using JShell privately on some of my projects, and it's really a great productivity tool. Now, you have some idea, you're rushing off somewhere, and you quickly just want to try something out. It's bugging you at the behind of your head. And launching JShell and quickly writing a snippet, sending it over to a colleague and saying, I think I found a fix for that bug from yesterday. It's a game changer. So once you develop some small chunk of code and it works in JShell, you can be sure it works in your bigger project. So just copy pasting your solution from JShell is not a problem, it works. And the biggest thing about JShell is that it's a Java 9 tool. A Java 9 tool that you can use on previous versions of Java. So Java 8, Java 7. I was working for a long time on a legacy project on Java 6. It's not a problem with JShell. You just open an older Java version through the class path and it works. So I can't state how much of a productivity tool JShell really is. That's all from me. Are there any questions? Yes, of course. Yes, yes. So the try artifact JShell, the custom JShell I showed earlier, actually works in that way. It injects you in the middle of a process. That's how you can try out Spring with JShell. Great question. Of course it is. That's a part of the JDK API for JShell that I mentioned at the beginning. So you have a program that you would like to use JShell, I don't know, maybe some kind of developmental program, and you want to check the user's input. If it's okay, you pass it to JShell, JShell returns it's okay, and it works. So yes, it's possible. If that's everything, thank you for your attention, and